They called me a failure, told me I'd never amount to anything. But here I am now, worth $50 million, and they all want something from me. My name is Jessica Adams. At 25 years old, I had everything anyone could ever dream of. A name that opened doors, wealth that others envied, a family everyone thought was perfect. But in reality, I had nothing that truly mattered. I grew up in Beverly Hills, surrounded by marble floors, private jets, and the constant buzz of high society. My father, Charles Adams, was a real estate mogul, his name, in every magazine and on every business deal. My mother, Linda, was the epitome of a socialite, always the center of attention at parties, making sure the world saw her picture-perfect life. From the outside, everything looked perfect. We had a mansion with views of the city, designer clothes, and vacations that would make anyone envious. But no one knew the truth. Behind the glossy exterior, something vital was missing. Love. Real love. Not the kind that came with an expensive gift or a perfect dinner party, but the kind that saw you for who you truly were, without the facade. For as long as I could remember, I was nothing more than a trophy daughter, a symbol of my family's wealth and status. My parents didn't love me because of who I was. They loved the idea of the perfect daughter. As long as I followed their rules, as long as I kept up appearances, everything was fine. But the minute I strayed, the minute I stopped fitting into their picture of perfection, everything changed. Then one day, I met Alex. Alex wasn't like the men my family approved of. He wasn't wealthy. He didn't come from a high society background. He was a mechanica man who spent his days fixing engines and working with his hands. But there was something in his eyes, something that was different from anyone I had ever known. He didn't care about my last name. He didn't care about my family's wealth. He saw me for who I truly was, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could finally breathe. Our connection was instant. It wasn't about status or what we had. It was about something real, something deep. Alex saw me, not the perfect daughter, not the symbol of success. He saw me, Jessica. And for the first time, I wasn't just a product of my family's expectations. I was free. But I knew what would happen. I knew my family would never accept him. Alex wasn't good enough for them, and that terrified me. But it also made me realize something. If I didn't choose him now, I would lose the only real love I had ever known. It was a choice between the life I had always known, a life of luxury, of perfection, and expectations, and the man who showed me what real love could be. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the only one I could make. So I chose Alex. I chose love. I married him. But when I did, my family made their choice too. They disowned me. The day I married, Alex felt like stepping into a completely new world. My parents didn't show up to the ceremony. No calls, no messages. They erased me from their lives, just like that. All I had left was Alex's love. A love that had no strings attached. A love that was real. But as much as I had Alex, the reality of my decision hit me hard. I had walked away from everything. The mansion, the wealth, the glamorous life my parents had built for me. And I was left with nothing but the love of a man who had nothing to give but his heart. For the first time, I felt free, but that freedom came with a price. The first few months after the wedding were blissful, yes, but we were struggling. Alex's mechanic shop was small, and money was tight. I had always lived a life of luxury, surrounded by excess. But now, I was learning what hard work meant. Our apartment was small, the couch was old, and we had to skip meals sometimes just to make sure the bills were paid. But Alex never complained. He worked hard every single day, and when he came home, his smile made me feel like everything was worth it. We didn't have everything I had grown up with, but we had each other. And that, in a way, made me feel like I had everything I needed. Yet, there was still the sting of being rejected by my family. They were living the life I had once dreamed of. The lavish parties, the holidays in Europe. And there I was, scrolling through social media, watching them smile in front of the cameras, pretending that everything was perfect. But it wasn't. It never was. And the truth was, I wasn't sure if I had made the right choice. Would I ever be able to forgive myself for walking away from everything I knew? Or would I always feel like an outsider? Just when I thought I had come to terms with everything, I started to notice something. My family's empire, the one they had built with so much care and pride, was beginning to crumble. The businesses my father had carefully cultivated were struggling. The investments that had once been sure things were starting to fail. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorry. I didn't feel pity. I felt something else. Something that was hard to admit. I felt satisfaction. Their world was falling apart, and there I was, trying to build my own future. A future that was mine, not dictated by their rules, not controlled by their expectations. And that's when the calls started coming. My family, the same ones who had cast me aside for loving Alex, started reaching out. The first message came from my mother. "Sophia, we need your help." It was simple. No apology, no attempt to mend the rift, just a demand for help, as if they could wipe away the years of rejection with a simple message. I stared at the screen. The anger, the betrayal, it all hit me at once. How dare they? After everything they had put me through, they were asking for my help? The same family who had abandoned me because of a man who wasn't rich enough for them? But as the rage built up inside me, something else rose to the surface. A deep, gnawing feeling. I had a choice to make. They needed me. They needed the one they had cast aside. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive them. Not after everything. Not after what they had done. But then again, this was my moment. My chance to prove them wrong. To show them that I wasn't the failure they had always called me. I picked up my phone and made the decision. I would go to them. But not to save them. Not to be their savior. I would go to show them what I had become. I sat there, staring at my phone, the weight of my mother's message pressing down on me. "Sophia, we need your help." It felt like a slap to the face. All those years, all the painful memories. And now they wanted me to save them? I had built my life with Alex, a mechanic who didn't care about my last name. A man who didn't expect anything from me but my love. And in return, he gave me something my family never could. Acceptance. With him, I wasn't a symbol of wealth or a trophy daughter. I was just Sophia. But now, my family needed me desperately. I took a deep breath, my heart racing. The anger I felt towards them was suffocating. How dare they ask for help after everything they'd put me through? The rejection, the judgment, the countless times they told me I was nothing without their money, without their name. But there was something else bubbling inside me, something I couldn't ignore. This was my chance to show them that I had made the right choice, that I had the power to change everything. As much as I wanted to slam the door on their faces, I knew deep down that this was the moment. The moment I could finally prove that I was no longer the weak, dependent girl they used to control. I stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. Beverly Hills, the place that had given me everything and nothing. Everything that could be touched, seen, and shown off. But nothing that could fill the emptiness in my heart. I had chosen Alex, and for that, my family had called me a failure. They said I'd never be anything without them, but now, their empire was falling apart, and they needed me. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I'm not going to be their savior," I whispered to myself. "But I will show them that I've built something they couldn't even imagine." The next morning, I packed my things. It wasn't going to be an easy visit. I knew what they'd say, the mockery, the disappointment. But they were about to see a side of me they never had. I was no longer that little girl who begged for their approval. As I drove to their mansion, my palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. The same mansion where I grew up. The same mansion that had suffocated me for years. When I arrived, the familiar grandeur of the place hit me with a wave of nostalgia. The grand entrance, the crystal chandeliers that sparkled under the sunlight, everything screamed wealth and perfection. But I no longer saw it with admiration. Now, it just felt hollow. I walked up to the door, my breath steady, my heart pounding. The butler opened it, his face instantly going blank when he saw me. He was probably expecting the daughter they had abandoned, the one who would beg to come back. But that wasn't me anymore. "Miss Adams," he stammered, clearly taken aback, "your parents are expecting you." I nodded, keeping my head high, my eyes unwavering. He led me through the grand hallway, past the dining room filled with laughter and empty conversation. My parents, surrounded by their usual crowd of high-profile guests, probably talking about their next big investment or vacation destination. The familiar scent of expensive perfume filled the air. Everything was just as I remembered it, but for the first time, I could see the cracks in the walls. Everything was a facade, built on lies and superficiality. When we reached the door to my parents' study, I could hear their voices. They weren't speaking to me, but I couldn't ignore what they were saying. "She's coming. Can you believe it?" My mother's voice was sharp, filled with disdain. "She'll probably ask for money. After everything, she thinks we owe her something. We'll show her who's still in control here." My father's voice was cold, dismissive. "She needs us. She always has." A bitter laugh escaped my lips, though I quickly swallowed it. They thought I needed them? They thought they still had the upper hand? The tables had turned, and they didn't even realize it. I took a deep breath and walked into the study, not bothering to knock. My mother and father looked up, their faces dropping when they saw me. The silence was deafening. Well, my mother sneered. "Look who finally decided to show up." Her voice dripped with sarcasm, as if I were still the same naive girl she had disowned. But I wasn't. Not anymore. "You've certainly come a long way since you left us for your mechanic," she added, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father didn't speak at first, his eyes scanning me with that familiar look of disappointment. But this time, I didn't care. His judgment no longer held weight. "I'm not here to beg," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm here because you need me." The shock on their faces was enough to make me feel like I had already won. "You think we need you?" my father finally said, his voice laced with anger. "You made your choice. Now you want to come back and act like we owe you something?" I stepped forward, my voice unwavering. "You're wrong. I've been watching you all this time. Your empire, your so-called perfect life, it's falling apart. You need me, but not for what you think." The room went silent. The weight of my words hung in the air. My mother's face twisted with disbelief. My father looked like he was about to snap, but there was something in his eyes. Something that made me think maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see the truth. "What do you want from us?" My mother's voice cracked, fear seeping through her usual facade of control. "We've lost everything. Our money, our reputation. You're the only one who can save us now. What's your price?" I smiled. But it wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of power. "I'll help you," I said slowly. "But not the way you think. I'm here to show you what I've become. And if you want my help, you'll have to meet me halfway. I'm not your little girl anymore. I'm someone you'll have to respect." Their eyes were wide with shock. The power I had longed for was finally in my hands. This was no longer about family or money. It was about proving to the man, to myself, that I had built something real. And now, I was going to take control of my future. The silence that followed my words was thick, heavy. My parents exchanged uncertain glances, their usual arrogance fading, replaced by something I hadn't expected, fear. It was the first time I had seen them like this vulnerable. For all their wealth, power, and control, they were no longer the ones in charge. I was. My father's stern face softened slightly, but only for a moment. He cleared his throat and sat back in his chair. "You want respect, Sophia?" he said, his voice low, strained. "You think you've earned it? You think you've built something on your own? You don't know what it takes to run a business like ours." I stood tall, unwavering. "You're right, Dad. I may not know everything about running your empire, but I know one thing. I know what it takes to survive when everything's falling apart. And right now, your empire? It's crumbling." My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. "You don't understand, Sophia," she said, her voice suddenly smaller. "We've worked our entire lives to build this. We can't just lose it all. You left us, and now—" She trailed off, her words hanging in the air like a broken promise. "Now you want me to fix everything?" I asked, cutting her off. "You want my help? Fine. But it's not going to be easy. You'll have to do things my way. No more pretending everything's fine." No more hiding behind your fake smiles and perfect dinner parties. This time, it's about the truth. I could see my mother's eyes flash with something dread, maybe. The kind of dread that comes when you realize you're no longer in control. They had spent their entire lives crafting an illusion of perfection, and now it was all falling apart. I could feel the weight of the moment. I had fought hard for this, to stand here as the woman they had once rejected, to prove to them that I wasn't just some foolish daughter who'd run off with a mechanic. I was a force to be reckoned with. But just as I thought I might have finally gotten through to them, the door opened. It was Alex. My heart skipped a beat as I saw his rugged face, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the tension. He wasn't just here for moral support. I could see the determination in his stance. He knew what this moment meant. He walked in slowly, his presence filling the room. "Sophia, we need to talk." His voice was steady, unwavering. My parents turned, startled, but their faces quickly returned to their practiced indifference. I nodded at Alex, my heart swelling with pride. "I'll be right there," I said, not taking my eyes off my parents. I could feel the walls closing in again. But this time, it wasn't going to be like before. My father, still reeling from the shock, turned to me. "Who does he think he is?" His voice was tight with disdain, but I could tell the question was more about me than Alex. I wasn't about to apologize for the man I had chosen. Not now. Not ever. "He's the man who showed me what real love is," I replied, my voice calm but fierce. "He's the one who made me realize that family isn't about wealth or status. It's about loyalty, about standing by each other when everything falls apart, something you wouldn't understand." The words hit like a punch. My father's face reddened with anger, his eyes burning with rage. But there was a flicker of doubt in his gaze. He had never expected me to stand up to him like this. But then, the worst thing I could imagine happened. "I don't care about your love story, Sophia," my mother hissed, standing up abruptly. "You've chosen a life of struggle and mediocrity. You think we're supposed to celebrate that? You chose to leave everything behind, and now you expect us to, what? Be proud of you?" Her words cut deep, deeper than I ever expected. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about the business. It was about the years of rejection, the years of being told I was never good enough. But I wasn't going to let her words break me this time. "No," I said firmly. "I don't expect you to be proud. But I'm not here for your approval anymore. I'm here to help you, but only if you respect me. Only if you accept the choices I've made. Because I've learned something you never taught me. I don't need your approval to be successful." There was a tense silence. The air felt thick, as if the room were holding its breath, waiting for something to break. And then, my father spoke again, his voice barely audible but full of fury. "You've chosen a mechanic over us, chosen a life of mediocrity. And now, you think you can come back and fix what you've broken?" I met his gaze, unwavering. "You can call it mediocrity all you want, but it's real. It's honest. And it's something I built from the ground up. I'm here to offer you a way out of this mess you've created. But you need to accept that the world has changed. I'm not that little girl you once controlled." My father's eyes narrowed, his fists clenched at his sides. The power struggle was palpable. But it wasn't the same as before. This time, I wasn't backing down. "I'll help you," I continued. "But only if you admit that I'm no longer the girl you can push around." My mother's lips trembled as she looked at me, her mask of perfection slipping just for a moment. "You'll regret this," she whispered, her voice filled with a mix of fear and fury. I took a step closer, my voice low but firm. "No, you're the ones who will regret not seeing me for who I really am. I've been waiting for this moment for years, and now I'm finally in control." The room fell silent. They were no longer the ones holding the power. I was. But little did I know, this was just the beginning of the biggest battle of my life. The air in the room was thick with tension. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, the disbelief radiating off them like a cold, suffocating wave. My father's face was flushed with anger, while my mother's was pale with something deeper fear. They had underestimated me for so long, and now the tables had turned. I stood there, holding my ground, no longer the vulnerable daughter who had been desperate for their approval. No longer the girl who had been humiliated, pushed aside, and made to feel small. The woman in front of them was unrecognizable to the people they thought they knew. "You've made a big mistake, Sophia," my father muttered through gritted teeth. His voice was shaking now, not from the anger he had always held over me, but from something much deeper. Fear. "You think you can come in here and control everything, fix our businesses? You're just a naive girl who walked away from everything we've built." I stepped closer, slowly. I didn't flinch. The old fear was gone. "You're right about one thing, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "I walked away from everything you built. But that's because I realized it wasn't everything. It was fake, and now I'm building something real." His eyes narrowed, and my mother's lips trembled as she clenched her fists in frustration. "You think you can just erase everything we've worked for?" My father spat, his face red with fury. "I'm not trying to erase anything," I replied, my words like steel. "I'm just doing it my way, the right way." I could see them both struggle with this new reality. They had always been in control of everything: my life, their businesses, their world. But now, I was in the driver's seat, and they hated it. I didn't need them to admit that they had been wrong. They had already shown me who they were. But I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for Meph, for the woman I had become, for the life I was building. And I wasn't going to let their ego stand in the way of my success. Suddenly, the phone on the table buzzed, breaking the silence. My father's eyes darted to it, and I saw a brief flicker of anxiety in his gaze. He didn't pick it up, but the tension in the room only grew. I could feel the urgency in the air, the unspoken fear that was creeping in. They were on the verge of losing everything, and I was the only one who could save them. But I wasn't sure I wanted to. "I can help you," I said, my tone almost casual, but with a quiet, undeniable power. "But it won't be easy. You'll have to trust me, and that's something I'm not sure you're capable of." For the first time, I saw something shift in my father's eyes, something that looked like regret, the kind of regret you feel when you realize you've been fighting the wrong battle. "You want me to trust you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "After everything? After the way you left us?" I leaned in, the words heavy with finality. "I don't need your trust. I've been living without it for years. What you need to understand is that I have the power now. I'm the one who's going to decide whether this family's empire survives or crumbles. You pushed me away for choosing a life of love and honesty over wealth and power. But now, I'm the one who's going to decide if you get a chance to rebuild, or if I let it all fall apart." My father stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor as he did. I could see the veins in his neck bulging with rage. "You're not in control here, Sophia," he shouted, slamming his fist onto the desk. "You're still my daughter. You'll always be my daughter." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. "Not anymore, Dad," I said, my voice unwavering. "I'm not your little girl anymore. I'm Sophia Miller, the woman who built a future without you." There was a long pause. My mother, still seated, glanced between us, her eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and something else: regret. I could see the cracks forming in her carefully constructed facade. She had always been the socialite, the one who controlled everything with charm and manipulation. But now, she had no power. "I can't believe this," my mother whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "You've thrown everything away for love." "No," I corrected her softly. "I've thrown away everything that wasn't real." And that was the truth. I had built a life that was real, that mattered. The love I shared with Alex, the work I had done to build something from nothing, it was all real. It wasn't wrapped in gold or tied up in pretentious packages. It was raw, it was honest, and it was mine. The silence in the room felt thick enough to choke on. I could see that my parents were unraveling before my eyes. But I wasn't done. Not yet. "I'm giving you one chance," I said, looking directly at both of them. "You have a choice. You can either accept me as I am, respect the woman I've become, and let me help you, or you can watch everything you've built fall apart. It's your call." My father's jaw clenched, his hands shaking with the weight of everything he had lost. My mother's eyes were wide, a mixture of shock, guilt, and fear. They had underestimated me. They thought I was weak. But now, they saw the truth. I was no longer the girl they had rejected. I was stronger than they had ever given me credit for. I was in control. "What's it going to be?" I asked. My voice calm but firm, the power I held in that moment undeniable. The room held its breath. The fate of their empire and my future hung in the balance. The silence stretched, each second heavier than the last. The choice I had given my parents hung in the air like a thick fog, uncertain, tense, and unspoken. My father's eyes bored into mine, searching for a weakness, something he could exploit, but there was nothing. Not anymore. I was done hiding. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" My father's voice was a low growl, filled with bitterness. His pride was cracking, and I could see the frustration building within him. He wasn't used to being challenged, he wasn't used to being wrong, and the thought that I, his own daughter, could now control the fate of everything he had built was too much for him. I stood taller, feeling the weight of his words but not allowing them to touch me. "No, Dad, I don't think I'm better. I know I'm better. Not because of wealth or status, but because I've worked for everything I have. I've built something real, something that matters. You can't say the same." The words stung him. I could see that. He stood there, seething with the anger of someone who had spent their entire life building an empire based on appearances, only to see it crumbling from within. He'd never learned what it meant to truly build something that lasted. Not until now. My mother's gaze, however, had softened. A quiet vulnerability in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. She wasn't the woman who had once turned a blind eye to my pain, who had pushed me away for choosing love over wealth. She was a woman who realized that everything she had worked for was slipping through her fingers, and now she needed me more than ever. "You're right, Sophia," she whispered, almost as if she was talking to herself. "We've lost everything. Everything we've built is falling apart." I could see the regret in her eyes, the truth dawning on her. My mother had been the one who always upheld the image of the perfect family, the perfect life. But now, all of that was unraveling, and there was no hiding from it. "You were right to leave us." My mother's voice trembled, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy. For all the years of rejection, for all the hurt, this moment was a turning point. She had admitted it. She had finally seen my worth, not as her daughter, but as a woman who had earned the right to stand tall. "You've done what we never could. You've built a life based on something real." It was then that I saw the shift in my father. The walls he had so carefully built around his pride were crumbling. I could see it in his eyes, the recognition, the realization that everything he had worked for, everything he had tried to force me into, was just an illusion. He had spent his life chasing wealth and status, but it was clear now, none of that mattered. And in that moment, I realized something. My father, the man who had built his empire on the backs of others, was no longer the one in control. He had been dethroned, not by me, but by the life I had built without him. "What do you want from us?" my father finally asked, his voice rough. It wasn't a question of authority anymore. It was a question of desperation. I looked at both of them. My parents, the people who had tried to shape my life into something they could control, the people who had once made me feel small for wanting something different. But now, I wasn't that girl anymore. I had grown. I had transformed. "I'm offering you a chance," I said, my voice firm but calm. "You can either continue fighting me, continue living in your illusion of control, or you can accept me. You can accept what I've built, what I've become. Because if you keep fighting me, I'll walk away. And this time, I won't look back." The tension in the room was unbearable, the weight of my words pressing down on all of us. My parents stood in silence, their faces unreadable, but I could feel the shift. The power had moved from them to me. They could see it now. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I wasn't the girl they had tried to suppress. I was someone else, someone who had fought for what was hers. It felt like the moment had arrived, the moment where everything changed. I had given them the chance to redeem themselves, to see me for who I really was, but now the ball was in their court. My father shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his pride and his loss too much to bear. "I don't know how we got here, Sophia," he said, his voice softening. "But I can see now, maybe you do have what it takes." And just like that, I could see it in his eyes, the tiniest flicker of recognition, of understanding. For the first time, he saw me not as his daughter, not as someone who would always need his approval, but as a force to be reckoned with. "I won't ask for your forgiveness," I said, taking a deep breath, "but I will offer you a deal. I'll help you save what's left of your empire, but on one condition." "What's that?" my father asked, his voice cautious. "You respect me," I said firmly. "You treat me as an equal, as a businesswoman who has earned her place. You acknowledge what I've built, and you stop seeing me as the naive girl you abandoned." My mother nodded slowly, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. I could see the tears in her eyes, but this time, they weren't of regret, they were of acceptance. "I don't need your approval anymore," I said, the power of my words settling over the room like a storm. "But I do need your respect. And if you're willing to give me that, then I'll help you. But not before." The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, the decision hanging in the air like a sword ready to fall. But as I stood there, I knew one thing for sure. I had taken control of my life. I had taken control of this moment, and nothing was going to take that from me. The atmosphere in the room was thick with anticipation. My father, still reeling from my words, stood frozen, staring at me like he didn't know me. His expression was one of disbelief, mixed with a heavy dose of pride and regret. My mother, on the other hand, seemed to shrink into herself, her once grand stature reduced to someone vulnerable, someone who had realized too late that the world had changed and she had missed the shift. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let them see me falter. I had already paid the price for their rejection, for their refusal to see me as anything other than the perfect daughter who followed their rules. But now, I was showing them who I truly was, and that scared them more than anything. "I'm done with the games, Dad," I said, my voice steady but laced with the weight of years of frustration. "I'm done asking for permission. I've worked my entire life for this, and I'm not letting you or anyone else take it from me. The power has shifted, and if you want to be a part of it, you'll need to change your ways." My father's face twisted with anger. He was used to controlling everything, every aspect of our lives. This was his empire, his world, his rules. But now, I was the one holding the rain sand. He couldn't stand it. "You think you can just waltz in here and take everything we built?" he sneered, his voice low, as if he were trying to suppress the fear he couldn't hide. "You think you're in control? You're nothing without me." I met his gaze, unflinching. This wasn't the little girl who cowered under his expectations anymore. This was the woman who had built something on her own terms. "I don't need your empire," I said, my words cutting through the tension in the room. "I don't need your approval, or your money, or your legacy. I've built my own future, and I'll take it however I want. You've spent your life building an illusion. I'm here to build something real." The silence that followed felt suffocating. My father, the man who had always been so sure of his control, seemed to shrink in front of me. His chest heaved with each breath, his mind struggling to process the situation. My mother, who had stood in his shadow for so long, looked torn. She had spent her entire life upholding this perfect image, this image of wealth, status, and success. But now, that image was shattered, and in its place was the reality of their crumbling empire, and the daughter they had rejected for choosing a life of authenticity over status. "You can't just walk away from everything we've built." My father's voice wavered, finally showing the cracks in his once impenetrable armor. "We did everything for you, and you just left us for a mechanic? For love? You ruined everything we worked for?" "No, Dad," I said, my voice softening just a little, but the intensity behind my words never wavering. "I didn't ruin anything. You ruined it. You pushed me away for something that didn't matter. I didn't leave you. I left behind the lie you built. And now you're asking me to come back and fix it? To save what's left of your empire. You're asking for help, but you don't deserve it." Not without respect. For the first time, I saw my father flinch. He wasn't the towering figure of authority he used to be. Now, he was just a man who had built his life on the backs of others, and he was finally seeing the price of his actions. I could feel the power shift in the room. This wasn't about wealth anymore. This was about pride, about understanding the true value of what I had built. And for the first time, my parents realized it. They realized that I had become something more than they ever expected. "I don't need your empire, Dad," I repeated, my voice calm but resolute. "But if you want to save yours, you'll have to do it on my terms. You'll have to acknowledge me as a partner, not as a failure. Because I've earned it." The room was so silent, you could hear the clock ticking in the corner. I could see the shift in my father's eyes. He was no longer looking at me with disdain. Now, there was something else. Something like fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of the woman standing in front of him who had no fear of him anymore. My mother stood, her face pale, but her eyes gleaming with something new. "We've made mistakes, Sophia. I see that now," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "We were wrong. You were right." The words were barely audible, but they hit me like a thunderclap. For years, I had begged for their acceptance. I had worked so hard to make them proud. But now I was the one in control, and they had no choice but to admit that they had been wrong. "It's too late for apologies," I said, turning to walk away. "But I'm offering you a chance. Not for me, but for you, for your legacy. If you're willing to meet me halfway, we can rebuild, but it will be on my terms." I turned, not looking back. I wasn't the same person who had walked into this room. I had taken control. I had proven my worth, and I had won. As I stepped out of the door, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't over yet, but it felt like the beginning of something new, something that was finally mine. The days that followed were a blur of deals, negotiations, and hard choices. But the tension in the air, the weight of everything that had happened, hung over me like a storm cloud. My family had started to see the cracks in their perfect world. They had spent so long clinging to the illusion of power, but now they were finally understanding that power didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to me. Still, despite all the progress, the air felt thick with unspoken words. I had made my mark, but deep down, I knew the battle wasn't truly over. The journey I had taken wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about showing them that I could take control of my life without them. As I walked into the boardroom, my heart was steady. I had come a long way from the scared little girl who once begged for their approval. Today, I was there not to ask for anything, but to take what was mine. It was my empire now, and I wasn't going to let anyone or anything take that from me. The doors opened, and there they were. My parents, the very people who had once rejected me, who had tried to tear me down because of love. The tension was thick. They had agreed to my terms, but I knew their pride hadn't fully melted away. They still felt the sting of their own pride. And today, I was going to make sure they understood the full weight of what they had lost when they turned their backs on me. I locked eyes with my father. His gaze was hard, but there was something new, something in his eyes that looked almost fearful. He was no longer the man who had controlled everything with ease. Now, he was the one who had to play by my rules. "You think this is the end?" my father sneered, his voice colder than ever. I stood tall, my voice unwavering. "This isn't the end, Dad. This is the beginning. Your empire might have been built on power and pride, but I'm building mine on something real, something lasting." My mother, sitting beside him, looked older, smaller. The years of pretending to be the perfect family had aged her. She still wore the mask of grace, but I could see the cracks. She had always feared being outshone. But here I was, standing in front of her, stronger than she ever imagined. "You've changed, Sophia," my mother said, her voice laced with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "You were never supposed to be this. You were supposed to be our perfect little girl." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the silence fill the room. They had created the vision of who I was supposed to be. But today, I was showing them the woman I had become, the woman they had never truly seen before. "I didn't change, Mom," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I grew up. I found my voice. I found my strength. I didn't need your approval to build something real." There it was, the moment I had been waiting for. The realization in their eyes. They had underestimated me for far too long. They thought they could control me, mold me into something I wasn't. But now, they had to accept that I wasn't the daughter they expected. I was the woman who had built something far bigger than they ever could. Then came the real moment of reckoning. "I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness," I said, looking both of them in the eye. "I'm here because you need me, but don't expect me to save you just because you ask. I'm offering you a chance to join Menno because I want your approval, but because we all have something to gain." I could see their expressions change. It was happening, the shift. They were no longer the powerful ones. The tables had turned. "What do you want?" My father finally spoke, his voice more resigned than before. "What's your price, Sophia?" I paused for a moment, letting my words hang in the air. My price? My price is simple. I want respect. I want you to see me not as your failure, but as the woman who made her own path. The one who chose love over money, authenticity over status. I want you to acknowledge that. Their silence spoke volumes. They didn't like it. They didn't want to admit it. But they knew deep down they had lost. They had pushed me away for too long. And now, it was time for them to face the consequences. "You're going to regret this," my father muttered, his voice thick with anger. But the words weren't convincing. The fear in his eyes told me everything. "No," I said, locking eyes with him one last time. "I'm not the one who will regret this. You are. You were so focused on your empire, your image, that you couldn't see the one thing that really mattered, love. And now I have both." The silence stretched out, but I didn't wait for them to respond. I turned and walked out of the room, my head held high. I had done it. I had taken control, and nothing could take that from me. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside for choosing a path that wasn't perfect in the eyes of others, this story is for you. It's never too late to find your voice, build your future, and show the world who you truly are. If you're ready to take control of your life, stand tall, and prove that you don't need anyone's approval to succeed, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience, strength, and success. Remember, the world can try to define you, but only you get to decide who you really are. Now, go take control of your destiny.